It's important that a game challenges you. The feeling of overcoming a tough boss or clearing a difficult area is one of the main reasons I play games in the first place. Like, one of my most cherished gaming memories is beating these guys from Dark Souls 1 for the first time, after very calmly slamming my head against the wall while contemplating my life choices for a few hours. In the end, the effort that you put in pays off, and your struggle is eventually worth it. So the way I see it, difficulty is a good thing. It can force you to try harder, to use your head, and to stay more focused instead of just coasting through, and by doing this it gives you an opportunity to engage with the game at a higher level. But I feel like there is a limit to how much difficulty can be utilized to make the game better in a conventional gaming sense. This video is about difficult games, but not difficult in the way that Souls games or something like Cuphead is. I'm talking about games that are specifically designed to make you angry beyond belief and to take you along for a trip through the 5 stages of grief over and over again until you either give up or triumph. I'm talking about something known as rage games. Rage games as a genre is kind of difficult to look up info about, as when you Google it, you just get a lot of stuff about Rage Games, the game developer, that made, among others, this absolute slapper of a game. Now, while that looks like a great time, it's not what I'm looking for, and the actual characteristics that constitute a so-called rage game are left kind of vague. When you look at things like Reddit and try to see what people consider to be rage games, you get all sorts of results. Some people call a game like Super Meat Boy a rage game, but I think that's just a very challenging platformer. And then we have games like I Wanna Be the Guy, which is something that I would definitely call a rage game. It's a platformer filled with all kinds of traps and tricks designed to trip you up, make you doubt yourself, and make you angry. There are checkpoints in it though, which make it so that when you make it past a certain point, you're safe. But what if you weren't safe? What if there was always a possibility to make a mistake that undoes your progress and puts you back right where you started? If, for some reason, this is what you want, you can find this experience by looking up Foddian Games, a subgenre of rage games inspired by Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, named after the game's creator. I've seen content creators play these types of games before, and that's initially what I thought that their purpose was in the first place. YouTubers and streamers play these games to torture themselves in order to make their sick audiences happy. But then I thought to myself, is that really everything that these games have to offer? And is there something else, another layer to this that I'm overlooking? So I decided to investigate and take a deeper look at what actually is a Foddian rage game and what is really the point of playing them. The first key gameplay element that makes up a Foddian rage game is that they are relatively short and also linear. While beating a game like this might take you tens of excruciating hours, when zoomed out the games are not that long. Glitchless speedruns of these games usually only take up around a couple of minutes, which shows just how quickly they can be beaten when you don't make mistakes. You also don't ever have to really make a decision of where you should go in these games. You just go in one direction, which is usually up, and that's it. This makes the goal very simple, and there's no mystery that you have to figure out of how can I progress. You just have to do it. Where the complexity in these games come from is the second key characteristic, which is weird and finicky movement mechanics. The movement mechanics in these games are often very unique and have a massive skill ceiling when it comes to just getting the character to do what you want it to do. Let's take for example the classic Getting Over It. You're a guy in a pot who moves around by pushing himself around with a hammer. It's weird, awkward as hell, but a player who knows what they're doing can just fly around the game with no issues at all. The third and, in my opinion, the most important element in these games is the lack of checkpoints and the potential for massive setbacks in any point of the game. An unfortunate streak of small mistakes can stack up and then boom, you've just undone 5 hours of progress in 20 seconds. This is where the difficulty of the game comes into play, and due to the often unique mechanics in Foddian rage games, you're not really even given the opportunity to use your prior knowledge from another game to help you along and you have to start from a clean slate almost every time. And the combination of having to learn a new method of moving around and being punished massively for small mistakes, even when you're pretty much still just learning, makes these games feel so brutal to play. And the game knows that its demands from the player are unreasonable. It's an inherent part of playing a rage game like this, which brings us to the fourth element. The game is entirely self-aware of its difficulty, which is seen all over its design choices. For example, in Getting Over It, the developer of the game narrates through the events of the game, sharing information about the game's development, and talks about the feeling of starting over. And as your mistakes start stacking up and weighing you down, and you're back at the starting line for the millionth time, the narrator's words of encouragement start feeling less and less sincere.
Oh, you just lost a lot of progress. That's a deep frustration, a real punch in the gut.
And once you're mentally past a certain point of frustration, the narration turns from somewhat of a cool feature to something extremely annoying. Now, since clearly these games sound like such a blast to play, I started thinking, do people actually play and beat these games, or are they just sources of content for streamers and YouTubers whose fans then buy these games but never actually go through with playing them? To figure this out, I went to the Steam achievement page of Getting Over It, and I found out that only around 8% of the people that buy the game actually end up beating it. And the numbers are similar for other Foddian games as well. These percentages are extremely low for any game, and if we compare these numbers to a game like Sekiro, which spawned huge amounts of discourse regarding game difficulty, easy modes and accessibility, even its completion rate is massively higher. Around 18% of one of the endings, and there's 4 endings in total. Even though it kind of seems like it is so, viewing these games as just content machines is to me a pretty cynical point of view, and I doubt that the developers intended for these games to be only that. But since such a small number of people actually finish them, what is the point? And are people actually even supposed to beat them in the first place? What are these types of rage games supposed to make you feel? When thinking about that question, 2 things immediately come to mind for me. First, the feeling of overcoming something extremely difficult, and second, a shared experience between all of the people who have spent time playing the game. In terms of overcoming difficulty, hardship is what gives meaning and value to the experience. Feeling of starting from nothing, and instead of grinding for levels, you improve purely on the basis of your ability. Instead of the game changing, it's you that changes while the game stays the same. And due to these games not having difficulty options, everyone who has played them goes through the exact same demanding experience. It's cool. Not in an elitist way, but as a cohesive experience shared throughout a community of people playing the game. But these things are in no way exclusive to rage games. You can have the former experience in any challenging game, like for example Hades, and the latter in any game that has no difficulty settings, like Sekiro or Dark Souls. My hypothesis from my kind of limited experience of playing these games, for what feels different in rage games, is that it feels almost personal. It's not just difficult, but it's more like difficult and also fuck off, you're not even supposed to beat this game. When I play a game like this, I feel like the developer is trying to fuck with me, telling me through the presentation and the gameplay elements that I should give up. The insane setbacks and punishments are designed to make you feel angry and demoralized, and if you are a stubborn person who derives motivation from being doubted, this only makes you want to try harder and harder until you eventually win. I feel like this aspect of these games has 2 effects. One, it makes the experience of actually playing a game like this awful, and 2, it amplifies the good feeling that you get when overcoming something difficult, and adds a layer of almost like revenge to the experience. You're determined to beat the game as payback for it putting you through this. To gain a further understanding, I'm going to play and actually try to beat a couple of games like this, starting with at least Getting Over It and Jump King. And I'll see you after I've beaten some of these games, if I actually manage to do that. The first game I decided to go for is the classic Getting Over It with Bennett Foddy, released in 2017. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this is actually the first game of this style to be made. I saw some people saying online that Bennett Foddy just popularized the genre, but I couldn't really find other games that have this type of punishing checkpointless progression system quite like this before the release of Getting Over It. Even the game that directly inspired this one, Sexy Hiking, has checkpoints and doesn't really fit the genre because of it, in my opinion. Like I explained earlier, you play as Cauldron Hammer Guy. The hammer follows your mouse movements and collides with the environment, which allows your character to move around. Your goal is to just simply climb to the top through the various obstacles the game throws at you. And of course, as this is the OG Foddian rage game, if you make mistakes, you can fall all the way back to the beginning. I originally bought this game many years ago because I saw someone play it on YouTube, tried it for like 10 minutes but found it too frustrating to attempt to beat, so I set it aside and never picked it back up until now. And to be honest, now that I've played and beaten the game, it really wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. The movement mechanics, while weird, allow for a lot of control if you're being patient, and the game does a great job of showing exactly what and why things are happening, which makes it easy to figure out what you did wrong when you make mistakes. Starting over when you mess up feels undeniably daunting and awful at first, but as you're forced to repeat sections over and over again, you keep getting better and better at launching the guy around with your trusty hammer. This progression in your ability happens pretty quickly in Getting Over It, and it took me around 2.5 hours to beat it for the first time, most of which was spent on getting back up after falling during this one specific annoying mountain section. I wasn't expecting to, but all in all I actually kind of enjoyed this game. Climbing with the hammer is fun when you take your time with it, and the narration by the developer adds a lot of sometimes interesting and other times frustrating personality to the game. And beating the game after some pretty devastating falls felt great. Jump King, the game I immediately started after beating Getting Over It, was a very different kind of experience for me. Again, the goal is to get to the top, but this time the controls are very simple. You use the spacebar to jump, the longer you hold before you let go, the longer your jump will be, and again, of course, there are no real checkpoints. This game was seriously difficult for me, way harder than Getting Over It. The level design feels significantly more punishing, there are a lot more opportunities to make mistakes, which made my experience of playing the game for a lot of the time feel like I wasn't making any progress despite sometimes spending hours in the same area. Nailing the jumps in Jump King comes down to your muscle memory and ability to gauge distances, which is super difficult as there are no indicators for how long your jump will be. The pressure from knowing in the back of your mind that making a mistake will cost you a lot of progress can easily make you overthink the distances and mistime your jumps, which in turn causes you to be more prone to make mistakes the further you get and the higher the stakes are. Fun. Disregarding the gameplay elements, what I really enjoyed in this game was the environments and soundscapes. The pixel art in Jump King is very pretty, and I think it's one of the main reasons I actually managed to stick with the game as long as I did. As you progress through the game, you go through multiple visually distinct areas with a kind of medieval flair that all look interesting. And each of these areas are accompanied by their own very low-key soundtracks. Most of the music on here are these distant sounding dark ambient tracks that felt really immersive for me. The distance and the subtlety of the music here fits the gameplay loop of being stuck repeating the same jumps over and over again surprisingly well, and also when the music finally decides to get more intense, it does a fantastic job of applying that intensity and pressure to your jumps when it wants to. This game took me around 10 hours to beat, half of which was spent on attempting this one specific jump, falling down, getting back up and then trying it again. And unlike Getting Over It, most of the time, playing this game was not fun at all, even if the game kind of made up for it in the vibes department. I did manage to beat it though, and finally beating it after struggling for 10 hours did feel nice. As a whole, Jump King is a cool experience, but unless you're willing to go through at least a few hours of defeating gameplay, which is totally reasonable, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to you. The third game of this type that I tried was Pogostuck. I'm going to keep this one short because I didn't finish it. The movement is pretty interesting and awful at the same time. You're basically constantly jumping with a pogo stick, and if you do a flip, you jump higher. The style of the game in terms of visuals and sound didn't really do it for me personally, so I couldn't be bothered to keep playing this one any longer than just for a few hours. If I wanted to play some more of these types of games, I would personally rather go for one of the Jump King DLCs or just another game entirely. After playing these games, I realized that I didn't fully get it until I genuinely attempted to beat one. The rage is obviously a key part of the experience. The challenges are insane, the controls are weird, and the games are designed to make you angry and frustrated. But rage was not the only emotion I felt when playing these games. For the majority of the playtime, the challenge, the mountain you have to climb to beat these games, feels just insurmountable and genuinely feels impossible to even imagine getting to the top, and I especially felt this when playing Jump King. While at first this felt frustrating and kind of like bad game design for me, which amplified the revenge aspect I talked about earlier, after I got past the frustration, the feeling of the challenge being impossible allowed me to kind of detach myself from the result of what was happening, and instead just focus on the jumps. If I fall, I've done it before and I know that I can get back to where I was. And this mindset made me, in a way, actually enjoy playing the game more. But after playing the game for hours and hours, there came a moment, a feeling that kind of crept up on me when I slowly started realizing that, oh, I'm going to actually beat this game and it's only a matter of time until I reach the top. Before actually beating one of these games, I would have imagined that this realization would be like a massive dopamine hit or a really hype moment, but it really wasn't that for me. And instead, realizing that I will beat the game felt weirdly bittersweet. Dragging out the part where you're crossing the finish line like this over possibly an hour or two really made me contemplate the experience, and I already started feeling kind of nostalgic for the game even before I had actually gotten to the top. What was before a need for revenge against the game had turned into appreciation for the developer and other people who have played the game for allowing me to participate in this experience, and for myself for sticking with it despite it feeling impossible. Of course, the final jump was still very hype, but this kind of drawn out ending of a game like this is not really anything I've ever experienced in other games before. Beating a hard boss or clearing an insane platforming challenge feels great, but in those cases you're starting from the point of view of course I'm going to beat this, whereas in this case I definitely didn't. After finishing a few, I can tell that these games are a lot more than just content for streamers and YouTubers. They are a pretty unique experience, and if hearing about it made you interested, you should at least try them. These games are also a lot of fun to play after you've beaten them once, and it's so interesting to see just how much easier they feel once you've gone through them before. If you've tried playing a game like this or are going to, please let me know how you like it in the comments. I would be super interested to hear about your experience. And that's the end of the video. If you liked it, please leave a like, and if you want to see more stuff like this, please subscribe to the channel. I actually made a Twitter, so if you want to follow, I'll leave a link to it in the description. But yeah, thank you again for watching. I hope you have a good one.